funding has become an essential component of sustaining impactful research programs. That's very much the case in our own country, whereby funding is becoming increasingly difficult. And of course, it's also important for advancing our scholarly research. In the seminar, Professor Joseph Kracek will reflect on his extensive experience in developing successful research grant proposals and leading large-scale funded projects in science and STEM education. He will discuss key strategies for conceptualizing strong research ideas, aligning proposals with funding priorities, building collaborative research teams, and communicating significance and innovation effectively. Professor Joseph Kracek, for those of you who are not familiar with him, he is the director of the Create for STEM Institute. Is also the Lopan Phillips Professor of Science Education and a University Distinguished Professor at Michigan State University. Throughout his career, Joe has collaborated with colleagues and science teachers to design and test project-based learning environments, to improve teaching practices, and to research student learning and engagement. Joe has also investigated the design of formative assessment to promote student learning, and recently he has explored machine scoring to assess open-ended assessment tasks. Joe has had a very decorated academic career. He has served as the president of NAST, which is a global organization in science education. And from NAST, he has received distinguished contributions to science education. Through research awards that he has collected over the years, he is well known globally for his contribution. Joe himself is very willing of his knowledge and expertise, and we've certainly appreciated his presence in South Africa. Looking at his Google Scholar profile, we would see that he has had a number of publications, in fact, well over 100 publications. His work is extremely well cited. Joe was elected to the National Academy of Education, and he received the prestigious McGraw Prize for Innovation in Pre-K-12 Education. In 2021, the International Society for Design and Development in Education awarded him the prize for excellence in education design. We are also very proud to have Professor Joseph Kracek as a distinguished visiting professor in the Department of Mathematics, Science and Technology Education in the Faculty of Education at University of Johannesburg. So just to also add that Joe is visiting us at the faculty. In fact, Joe, as you see him, he's at the CalSTEAM Research Center, and this is the second week. He arrived Monday last week, and he's going to be departing on Friday. So he's very much had a packed itinerary, and I managed to convince Joe to do this seminar for us. I certainly hope, expecting that it's going to be very useful to us. Joe, as I mentioned, has got extensive experience in writing up grant applications and securing funding. And of course, he comes from a very competitive grant funding space in the United States. So with that, Joe, I welcome you to this seminar, and we are all looking forward to the message, the strategies that you can share for us, and I'm quite sure it's going to be very helpful to all of us in the faculty. So over to you, Joe.
Production. Hopefully I'm not sure why we're getting an echo. Maybe it's gone. Good. I think the echo's gone, so we're okay. So what are we going to do today? Umesh already told you a lot about me, so I'll just share a little bit more when I get to that point. The major purpose behind this actually is to share some points about how to really write successful grant proposals. And those reflections are going to come from basically my background. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end to respond to questions and for you to deliver comments both virtually and in presence here in CalStream. So Umesh told you a little bit about my academic career. I'll just tell you a couple of points that aren't on my resume or that Umesh didn't respond to. I am a former high school chemistry teacher. I taught chemistry for a number of years in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But a couple of other aspects underneath all that, beyond my academic life, is that I love to travel and learn about various cultures. That's why I always enjoy my experiences here in South Africa. And I also really love nature, both above and below the sea. So let's get into talking about writing competitive grant proposals that could be successful. Often people think grant writing is about describing your ideas, but in fact, it's persuasive. I can't think of a better situation. You know, we always talk about what's the difference between argumentation and explanation. When I write a grant proposal, I'm always thinking about an argument. I really want to persuade other people. I need to persuade the reviewers and the funders that the problem that I have matters, that the approach, the methodology I'm going to use is very sound, that I have a team that can actually execute my plan, and that the outcomes, the benefits of the outcomes are really important. So you want to think of a proposal as an argument to convince others. And that problem in that argument, you really want to specify that the problem you're going to work on is critical and the plan that you have developed with your team works and that your team can actually pull it off. Those are so essential. So don't think of a grant as describing what you do. Think of it as you're trying to convince someone else. So reviewers are a very important part of grant proposals. And often when a reviewer looks at a grant, they ask various questions of themselves, like, why is this an important problem? And why should we do it now? Why this approach? Why does this approach actually allows me to answer this question? Why this team? What does this team, this group of people bring that other groups don't do? Is the project feasible? Can they actually pull that grant off? Can they pull off the work they want to do? Is the evaluation credible? And I'll talk more about that later. And are those outcomes of the grant actually worth the investment? So every section of the proposal should answer one or more of these questions in very clear language, very comprehensible. So one of the things you have to, so why reviewers are very important to a grant, you also have to realize some realities of reviewers. I don't know how many of you reviewed grants, but reviewers typically are very busy people. They're overworked. Often they read quickly. And as a result of the very busy and they're overworked and they read quickly, you really need to hook them from the beginning. You need, when they first start reading your proposal, if they're not hooked that this is a valuable problem to solve, you probably lost them. Reviewers also have judged many proposals, so particularly if you have experienced reviewers. And often there's going to be reviewers on the panel that go outside of your expertise level, right? They have a different expertise. Can they hear me? Yeah. So you need to make sure in your grant, because the reviewers may have different expertise than you have, that you very clearly explain all your constructs and all your variables. And finally, reviewers always search for coherence. Does that grant really build? Does the problem, the question, can it really get answered by the methodology? So you're going to look for that coherence from the purpose to the questions to the methodologies to the expected outcomes. And they're also going to look, is it feasible? Can they really do it in the time frame that they specify? So what's the implication behind all that? You want to make sure your proposal is easy to navigate, easy to read, easy to trust,
Joe, if I
and
may,
as a result, hopefully it's easy to score highly.
Joe, if I may just stop you, please. It seems like your slides are not changing. We are
So
on your.
if you're going to write a proposal, the key components that really are going to make it strong is for you to basically work through all these parts and convince people that this is important. So what's the problem or need? What's your goal? What's your research questions? What's your methods? How are you going to evaluate, are you being successful or not? What outcomes do you anticipate? What's the dissemination? And does the budget actually align with all of it? So weak proposals often lose coherence between these components, and you want to always link back to them, right? So these are the major parts of any proposal, and you have to make sure that they are aligned and linked to each other. So given all that, what are some common reasons for why proposals fail? So often, frequently, weaknesses in proposals include unclear significance. Why is this problem important? It's not really brought up front. It's an overly ambitious scope. That means it's not feasible. The methodology is fairly weak. You don't explain it deep enough. You have a disconnected evaluation plan. The outcomes aren't clearly specified. They're vague. You provide insufficient preliminary evidence. Like what evidence did you have that what you really want to accomplish is going to work? There's poor writing organization, and there's lack of reviewer guidance. Now, I say that because one way that you can really help reviewers is really by providing clear headers that can act as a guide to the reviewers, and not just major headers, but subheaders under each part. So given that reviewers could come from different disciplines, given that reviewers are busy, given that they have a number of proposals to write, clarity beats complexity. So many unsuccessful proposals sound sophisticated, but they remain unclear. And so clarity is your primary goal. Strong proposals, and this is key, has to respond to the call. You need to know what the request for proposals is asking for. You could write an outstanding proposal, but if it doesn't match what the request is for, then it's not going to go anywhere. So you need to make sure that when you're writing your grant, you're writing your proposal, that you're responding to the call for proposals. You want to make sure you use direct and clear language, which means you need to define your terms and concepts explicitly. You want to make sure that you avoid unnecessary jargon. Often educators are famous for various jargon terms, and you want to try to prevent that. As much as possible, you want to use short paragraphs, but make sure they're clear and you get your point across. And this is, often you hear, do not repeat yourselves in your writing. Well, in grant writing, often foregrounding your key ideas repeatedly becomes really important. So you're going to be writing for tired and busy reviewers. And so you're going to have to use design strategically. As I mentioned, use descriptive headings. These will help guide your reviewers. Make sure you utilize figures and tables wisely, but also remember, often proposals have page limits, and figures and tables take up space. So you want to use tables and figures. At the same time, you want to make sure you use them wisely. Making summary statements that tie everything together, your purpose, your questions, your methodology as you move through, can act as important connectors. So you always want to link back. You want to provide roadmap right up front. You want to, and throughout, you want to make sure you provide a roadmap of where you're going, and always, highlight that. And then lastly, you want to be really clear on the deliverables that you will present as a result of this work. Never ever make reviewers search for your main argument.
Change the slides because they're not moving.
These are moving.
They're not moving on the Teams.
Yeah, they're moving.
They're moving from your side here, but on Tim's they are not moving.
Well, I don't know what to do. I mean, it's not me. They're moving up there, right? So they move on my computer. They move up there. I'm not sure what I could do
Okay,
to make the move.
what you can do is share your entire screen. The whole screen. Yeah.
Not on slideshow.
Show. Fine.
Okay, well, sorry about that glitch. This is a new thing we're trying. We thought we were hooked up okay, but I guess we weren't. But hopefully you heard my voice. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the slides are available online, and you'll see that tiny URL. I'm going to just jump back to the beginning. So if people didn't get that URL, and I'll come back. This is I guess I forgot to mention, this is a tiny URL that you're able to download the slides. And so even though you may have missed some of those images to begin with, if you download the slides at tinyurl.com/grantwritinguj, you'll be able to get the slides and catch up to where I was. So I apologize for that small glitch. And I believe we're at the slide here, the importance of framing. So as in grant proposals, I kind of summarized big points, and now I'm going back and I'm picking up some of those points. So one of the most important aspects that you can do in writing a grant is make sure the framing comes across. Why is this significant? And that often refers to what's the contribution that this grant is going to make to the literature, right? That's the significance. And you really have to be clear in specifying why this is important. And why do we have to do it now? What's the urgency behind this? Then there's broader impacts. And broader impacts are different than significance. Remember, significance goes towards the intellectual merit, right? What will we learn new that we didn't know before that's going to contribute to the literature in the broader field that's going to really make a difference? That's different than broader impact. Broader impact means who will this benefit? Who's going to really get the most out of what you're doing. So you need to specify very clearly who's going to benefit from this work. And as I mentioned before, so critical is this alignment to the agency's priorities. And this is why you have to know what that call is all about. And then I also have down here contribution to the field, but this is again linking back to the significance, the intellectual matter. So framing often determines a reviewer's enthusiasm before the methods and even in the evaluation. So you want to make sure that within the first several pages of that grant proposal, you very clearly specify why this is important, what's the significant, and who's going to benefit from this, and why do I got to do this now? I can't stress that enough, that you have to hook the reviewers with those first 2 or 3 pages, because they're busy people. They're not going to carefully read everything else, even though you do a great job on the methodology, if it's not important for them to keep going. Then we could have great ideas versus fundable ideas. Great ideas are not automatically fundable. Fundable ideas are important, but they're also supported by evidence. Often in grant writing, you need to point out what evidence you have up to now, even if it's very tentative evidence that shows this is going to work. You have to realize that you want to make sure that the measures were really designed to support the outcomes you're trying to get to. You have to have a feasible budget and timeline. Often people don't think much about this, and it gets them in trouble actually both getting funded and when they're doing the work. So if your budget doesn't match the work you're trying to get accomplished, you're really going to be in trouble. So you want to make sure that that budget really matches what you want to do and that it's feasible. And some reviewers look very, very closely at that. So it's important both for the review process, but it's also really important for you in getting the work done if it indeed does get funded. Once again, that importance of aligning with the solicitation is critical. In clarity of thought, alignment, coherence through the project, through the whole proposal are really important to make sure others review your work appropriately. So going a little bit deeper into the solicitation strategies, when you write a grant, you have to really study the priorities, review the criteria, the language patterns that they're expecting you to do. What are some fundable examples that have happened before? And what's the budget expectation? I recently worked with a good colleague of mine, Dr. Namsu Shin, which she must have read that solicitation about 1,000 times. She knew that solicitation backwards and frontwards, but it resulted in us getting a very nice large grant. And so that's critical to really understand the solicitation. Don't read it once, you got to read it several times to really understand the priorities of that agency. Often there's program officers, as you know, associated with submitting grants to various agencies. And if it's allowable, contacting program officers early on in the process to get their opinion about what you're doing, basically shooting by them what your question is and seeing what they think of it and the priorities that you have are really important. So you want to make sure that early on in your writing your grant that you contact your program officer, the program officer, and you say to them, let's have a conversation about this, and make sure you come to them with effective questions that can really help you write your proposal. So building an effective problem statement. So what's in a problem statement? Well, you want to make sure you clearly identify what's the gap in the literature that's critical for this grant? Right? What are you, this isn't just an idea out of nowhere. What's the gap, both in the literature, but also in the real world that you're trying to fill? And in building that problem statement, you want to know, you want to be able to specify what evidence is there out there that this could actually really work or not work. Establishing urgency, why now, is critical. Why do I want to do this now? So very important. You want to demonstrate consequences. What's going to happen if you don't do this? What's going to happen if you do this? At the same time, you want to make sure you don't overstate what your grant's going to do. And you don't want to basically overstate the work you can actually get accomplished. And you notice there's a little bit of repetition in some of my remarks, but you want to ensure that the problem statement aligns with the goal of the RFP. The reader, when they're reading your problem statement, should basically be convinced that this work is important, and therefore, if they're convinced after reading your problem statement, that this grant work is really important, they're going to go on and they're going to read the rest of the proposal carefully. So it's so critical that up front, this problem statement is really thoughtful. So defining goals and objectives. So goals, you want to make sure that goals are important, they're coherent, and they're achievable. Objectives should be measurable. So they're often, there's a really interesting question. What's the difference between a goal and an objective? And if you're new at this field, new at this work, it's even more a little bit mixed up, right? So I'm going to stress a little bit on what's the difference between these two types. So goals are these your big overview statements of what you really want to accomplish. Objectives, on the other hand, are specific and concrete. They're measurable. You can operationalize them. So this is very important to make a distinction between those. And sometimes people get them goofed up, right? They call goals objectives and objectives goals, but they're very different. Think of goals as a big overview. So here's an example, for example, a goal: improve middle school students' writing of scientific explanations. And then underneath that big goal, I can have several objectives. So develop and implement an inquiry-based instructional units for 8th grade classrooms that support students in developing scientific explanations. Second goal of the project under this big goal could be provide professional learning for 40 science teachers on how to implement the units. And the third objective could be see an increase in student scientific explanation scores by 15%. So that's the difference, right? Goals are your big vision. Objectives are smaller and they're actionable. They can be measured and they can get accomplished. So now we finished the front part of the grant that basically convinced a reviewer that it's important to move on. And so now you have to develop a strong methods section. And within this, reviewers really look for methodological coherence. Does it all build sequentially on each other and link back? Is the design appropriate? Right? So sometimes you get a mismatch in the question and what you're trying to propose. If you're asking a question that's calling for causation, then your methodology has to make sure you're measuring how one variable impacts another variable. So you want to be really careful that there's a link between your questions and the methodology you're proposing. That's also related to the appropriate design. Is it feasible? Can you really pull it off with the resources you have, the time you have, and your own particular background? You want to also make sure that you have adequate sampling. Is this a big enough sampling to actually make your to make the claims you want to make, or will you come away just with some evidence but not any firm statements. You want to make sure that you have adequate sampling to be able to support the claim you want. You want to make sure there's analytical rigor, that the data that you collected is really systematic, and that the different data can actually support each other in specifying the claims. Now, often when you carry out a grant, the work, it doesn't go like you want. Unfortunately, that's just the way the real world is. It's a messy place. So what contingency plans might you have if something goes astray? So you want to think of, when you think of designing a strong method section, you want to ensure that it feels executable, you can really do it, and not necessarily inspirational. This is where you really want to have people say, these people, this group, can really pull it off. So you want to think of these different parts. You want to think of your goal. What are we trying to accomplish? You want to think of the objectives. What specific concrete steps or targets will help us achieve the goals? You want to think of the methods or the activities. What will we do? And you want to think of outcomes. What evidence will show that the projects made a difference? That's your outcomes. So you want to make sure that these all align very sequentially. Now, a big part of grants are evaluation. And what the evaluation means, it's not the data that you're collecting that basically is answering your question. Evaluation refers to basically, are you actually accomplishing what you want to accomplish in the grant? So that's what the evaluation is. And so you often, in many grants, at least that I've written, there's always been an outside evaluator or some group that's evaluating your plans going forward. And you want to make sure when you talk about your evaluation plan that it aligns with the project goals, that it specifies the evidence sources that they will collect to make sure you're meeting the objectives of and the goals of the project. It includes measurable indicators. It describes what analytical approaches they're going to use, and it also supports continuous improvement. So for instance, I just had an advisory board, which for a grant that I'm having on supporting high school kids in energy transfer. And our advisory board, we had an advisory board meeting, which is our evaluation group. And they wrote some, while they listened very closely and wrote up front about what we accomplished, in the end, they also suggested ways in which we could improve. So you want to make sure that your evaluation plans always have that continuous improvement about how you can even get better than what you're doing involved in part of your grant work. So broader impacts, again, I'm going to make this distinction because it's so important. There's a difference between the significance and the impact of this grant as far as the literature goes versus who's going to benefit. And so you want to very clearly specify who's the intended people out there. Are you trying to work with teachers in under-resourced schools? Are you working with kids in under-resourced school? Are you working with a much broader segment of the population? Who benefits? So this is such a critical aspect, and also how the field benefits overall from it. But then there's also dissemination. What are you going to do to disseminate the findings? Are you going to write journal articles? Are you going to write a book on it? Will you present at conferences? Will you both academic conferences as well as teacher conferences? So how will you spread the findings? And who are those communities? As I said, is it the academics? Is it the teachers? Who's going to, what communities are going to be affected? And at the end, when you're done with your grant work, what products will remain? What is going to be, what's going to be there that other people can use and take that work further? Not only you, but other people. Now, this is probably one of the most important aspects of writing any proposal, thinking about any project. and that's developing a logic model. Logic models really get almost become you think of a logic model almost as a blueprint. It's a visualization or a conceptual representation that shows how the project is expected to work. And it literally links together the goals, your theoretical ideas, your activities, the outputs that you're going to have, and the outcomes. This is such a substantial aspect of writing any grant. It may not go in the grant proposal. Sometimes they do. Sometimes various funding agencies require you to include a logic model. Or you might want to just put it in there as a roadmap so other people who are reading your grant could follow. But working on developing a logic map, a logic model is so critical. I perhaps got my largest grant that I ever received, and largest continuous grant from a logic model I wrote for the George Lucas Foundation. So you might, and I think I have time to show it. So logic models help alignment in many ways. They align the research questions, the theoretical framing, the methods, the data collection, the analysis, and the outcome and claims. That's what a logic model looks like. So weak studies often fail because these components are disconnected. And the reason why those components are disconnected is because the writer, the faculty member of that grant never took the time to sit down and write a logic model. So I'm going to see if I can pull up my logic model just so they can see it for a second. I'm going to, excuse me for a second while I pop out of this, but I want you to be able to see this. Okay. I think I have to stop sharing, unfortunately. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second, and then I'm going to share again. I wish I share. Okay, I think you could see this. Is that correct, everybody? So this is a logic model. And as I said, a logic model is basically a visual representation of what you want to accomplish. In almost any study you do, constructing a logic model becomes a valuable roadmap for you, right? So the first thing you always want to start off with is what's your question? So you can see here, and I'll read it for you because it's a little hard to see, how to support all students, particularly diverse students, English language learners, and at-risk students in learning science and improving language literacy and mathematics. That was the research question we were trying to answer. I clearly specified my theoretical foundation. It's grounded in situated cognition, active construction, principles of universal design, and social interactions, as well as cognitive tools. That theoretical foundation leads to the major intervention, which is project-based learning and really active professional learning. That then links to improvements in the classroom environment, where we can see increased and enhanced instruction time for science at the elementary level, because this project is focused at the elementary level. We see more science talk. We see more kids involved in trying to make sense of phenomena. That gets us to intermediate outcomes, which could be an increase in the use of science ideas in speaking and writing and talking science in class. But then that moves also to distal outcomes, where we really see improvement in student learning on distal measures. So I want to encourage you, whenever you write a grant, actually whenever you're trying to do a research project, to create a logic model that maps out where you're going, what's the underlying theoretical ideas, what's the intervention, what are the improvements you're going to see, and what are the outcomes. This takes time, but boy, is it successful. Almost every successful grant that I've had started with working out a logic model. Now, like many things, this logic model seems pretty clean. But let me tell you, it took a long time to develop it. It's like anything, first drafts never look right. Second drafts aren't there either. This is probably the fifth draft of this logic model when we wrote it, maybe even more. But the time and effort, I can tell you, was well worth it. This, like I said, this gave me really a grant that was able to support my research center for about 8 years with a lot of people, and it ended up with some really important products. Okay, so I'm not going to back out of this, and I'm going to go back over here. Good. So that's logic models. If you take one thing away from you today, you're going to get involved in a research project, construct a logic model. So logic models are more than just planning tools. Logic models really help you in reasoning through the grant. They're also a communication tool because they give you a way of talking about it. They're also an alignment and coherence tool because they show how each section works together. And then finally, they're an evaluation tool that your evaluator can help put together. What am I going to look for to see if these guys are really being successful or not? Budgets. I can't tell you how important it is to write good budgets. And your budgets should really tell a story along with your grant. It's basically going to say, do you have realistic staffing? Are there personnel that are missing? Do you have all the resources that you need in there to get what you really need? Or are you overreaching? Now, I just got done writing a grant a little while ago, about a year and a half ago, that got funded. Fascinating enough. It's also a very nice grant. And we did a lot of work on it. But me, my colleague and I, we worked so hard on writing the proposal that it was coherent. We really messed up on the budget. No one caught it, including the program officers or the reviewers. And we're struggling now, going back to talk to the program officer and saying, we have to rebudget because the resources aren't in the right spot. So making sure your budget works is critical. Often, depending on the funding agency you're working with, they really encourage collaborative proposals. What does that mean? It means different institutions coming together on the same project to solve the pressing problem that you have. Collaborative proposals are wonderful. I've built collaborations with from writing grants with people throughout the world almost. I've had grants from people from Europe, from Israel, and from the Asia. And when you have all those different players involved, plus within the United States, right? So I've had a number of grants with colleagues throughout the United States. But if you're going to have a collaborative requirement and you want to keep your friendships and your collaborations, you have to make sure that the roles are clearly defined. What is my responsibility? What's your responsibility? How you're working together. You're not doing separate things. You're actually working together. So how are you actually integrating the pieces to come out with the outcomes you want? You have to have realistic coordination plans. How are you doing all that? How are you doing all that coordination? And finally, you have to realize there's shared ownership in that intellectual work. So you're going to realize when you write a paper, there's going to be individuals from other institutions, and you're going to have a big group. But collaborative teams can really increase the kind of work you can get accomplished, because in this, it's really hard for one person or from several people within one institution to have all the necessary skills that you really need to really do good work. If it's feasible and you can include preliminary work, that always helps. Once you get one grant, you can always link back to your other ones. But initially, if you're starting a new area, if you can even have some tentative data that demonstrates the feasibility of the grant, of what you want to propose, as long as your expertise, and that methodology will really work, and that what you're proposing in a much larger area could be successful. It goes a long way in securing funding, particularly to spread what you're trying to get accomplished. Can't stress this one enough, the revision process. If you're going to write a successful grant, I've never seen them written just once. It's like any paper we've ever written. It has to be written once, again, 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 and again. Then you get a successful proposal. So you want to make sure you revise, and you revise consistently. I have spent just huge number of hours writing and rewriting proposals. And sometimes you feel at the end, did I say that before? But it's so critical. I can't stress the importance of revision. So I know there's, at least there's junior faculty members out here, and I'm sure there's junior faculty members online. How should you start? I'm going to really suggest that you need to start small, because you need to build a reputation. Don't try to go after the big fish all at once, because if you try to go after the big fish all at once, you could fail, and it could be devastating for your career. Do something small. The first grant I wrote was a small internal, I know it sounds like a lot of money for South Africa, but it's not in the United States. But it was a small grant, actually, for my institution. And I really worked hard on it. I wrote it and rewrote it and etc. And I got it. But that started my building of grant writing throughout my career. So you always want to start small and build your reputation. Or if you switch areas, or if for instance, you're not being successful, back down, back off, and propose something small. That's what's going to make you successful. You want to build a foundation. You want to get people to know you. You want people to know you can do good work, and then you can start going for a larger amount of money. But first, start small. Responding to rejection. This is always hard. And it's hard when we write a proposal. It's hard when we write a paper. It's hard whatever we do. But you want to learn from the rejections, right? You don't want to just take them and toss them. You want to learn from them. And that's also another such a key lesson, that we can learn from when we fail. Learning from when we fail makes us better. So if you get rejected, don't throw it away. Revise it and resubmit. This is the story of iQuest, which was another major grant I had with my colleague, Brian Reiser, who was at Northwestern. I was at Michigan. We wrote a curriculum grant to design materials for middle school, and it was rejected the first time. And then but we didn't give up. We, as it says here, we separated our emotions. And I know it's hard to separate your emotions. When you get rejected on something that you think is really important, it's hard. I get that. But we went back, we rewrote that grant. That gave us 10 years of funding. 10 years, right? I can almost specify my academic career in terms of decades of when I was involved in large projects. So if you get rejected, don't give up. Revise it, look at what they say very carefully, and then resubmit it. So some practical work advice: always begin early. Build timelines backwards, like when's the grant due? What do I have to get done at certain times? This is true in almost anything. It's true for your dissertations as well. If I have people out there working on their dissertations and thesis. In my own personal grant writing, I really like assigning sections to people. I might be the overall person overseeing the grant writing and what I want to get accomplished, but that I might assign something very specifically to someone else who has better expertise than me in that area. So I love to assign ownership to various sections and have people work on that. And then I can go in and read them, give them comments, tie it all together. So if you're working with various people, make sure you assign sections. Don't try to do it all on your own. At the same time, you want to make sure you maintain shared documents. Luckily, in this day and age, things like Google Docs makes it really easy for us to share. Microsoft Office does exactly the same thing. So there's a variety of different ways in which we could share. Make sure you have an internal schedule and live by it. And don't put everything off at the end. Once again, once you get the whole grant written, you want to make sure you go through it again and go through it again. So that's this last part about final integration, and make sure you check the budget, that the responsibilities are actually there appropriately. Okay, I'm going to go through this really quick because we're almost out of time. But I'm going to be here. I just want to touch briefly on this AI as a scholarly partner. People always ask me, can you use AI? You should never, ever use AI to replace your original thinking or your scholarly judgment. You always want to keep agency within yourself. There might be times when you might want to ask, there's a phrase that just can't get right. You might ask AI, how could I phrase this better? It's totally okay. I don't see anything terrible about that. You might want to use it as a brainstorming partner. Think that's okay as well. You might want to have AI read the whole thing at the end and say, you might ask it, is this coherent? You may not, I wouldn't necessarily believe what it says, but you might want to ask it. So you can use it, but you should never give up your ownership, what your original thought, your interpretations, your scholarly judgment over to AI. Yeah, use it for some things, brainstorming, maybe improving some clarity, but never ask it to write your proposal. So final takeaways, just to be quickly and short here because our time's up. Make sure you're clear, make sure it's coherent, it's got to be compelling, and it's got to be feasible. And it's got to align with those agency goals. Those should be the big messages you take away. It's clear. Give it to someone else to read to make sure they understand it. Is it coherent? Does it build on each other? Is it compelling? We can't live without getting this funded. Can these people really pull it off? And does it really align with the agency's goals? Take those points away, and I think you're going to be really great at writing grant, or a good start at writing grants. We're hitting the time that we're done. So I'm going to say, if you have questions, you can certainly email me at krajik@msu.edu. And once again, if you want to see these slides, please, these are just ideas that I've learned throughout my life in writing grants. They're available at this tiny URL. You're more than welcome to take them and use them. If you're going to do something with them, make sure you give me some credit. But certainly, if you want to use them to learn from, that's fine. So with that, I'm going to stop. I don't think we have time for questions because it's 3 o'clock. But if we do, I'm happy to take a question or two.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Joe. I'm just picking up on the chat there, the comments which are being made. I think people really appreciate the logic value. That's likely something that we have not thought about. It's certainly an aspect that I will be incorporating in planning grant application proposals. We have got two questions here that I can pick up if I will just call it out for you, Joe. The first question is from Dr. Olawale, and he asked, at what point do I present the logic model? Do I develop it for each research question in the proposal, or will a simple logic model suffice for the entire proposal? So it's on the use of the logic model. how to incorporate that?
I've always developed. I've always developed just one logic model. So I've not for the whole proposal, right? So you want to make sure the big question you're answering can encompass much of what's underneath it. So you might want to think of the question you're answering is really tied to the goals of the project.
Okay, great, thanks. And
multiple logic models in proposals. So that would be my advice.
okay, thank you for that, Prof. Joe. Another question it comes from Lerato, and the question is it wise to request a grant, I guess apply for a grant alone as an emerging scholar? Will the funders trust you, or do you suggest that an emerging scholar pair with a seasoned scholar, such as yourself? Will that improve the chances of securing the grant?
A good question. So I remember early on in my career, I wrote a grant on my own. And again, you never want to write a grant or do anything that's you stake your life on it. But I do remember I was very disappointed. And as a result, yeah, I was very disappointed. So I went on, tried it on my own. It didn't go anywhere. I thought it was a winner. I'd love to, if I could go back nowadays and talk to the program officer to find out a little bit about like, why didn't you fund me? But that's neither here nor there. I then wrote another grant with a seasoned colleague, as you suggested, Dr. John Lehman from the University of Maryland, and we were successful. That helped launch my career. John was the major PI on that grant. The next grant I wrote, I was a major PI, and I did have some other colleagues with me, but I was the first PI. I was the PI, and that one was a successful. So it's a case of one, but in my case of one, when I wrote one initially on my own, I failed. Now maybe it was too big. Actually, the original one I wrote, which was much smaller, but it was an internal grant, was successful. And then I went for this larger NSF grant related to that smaller one that I got internally, and I failed. So I don't know if it was too large. Maybe I would have been more successful with NSF if I just made the grant a little bit smaller in scope, but I wasn't successful. Then I did work with my colleague. I was successful. Again, I was the co-PI, he was the PI, but we were successful. That really got me into knowing how to write grants. It was a very successful grant. I should mention, by the way, if you want to continue building grants, making sure your reports to NSF or to your program, not NSF, make sure your reports to your funding agency are very complete, because that's what builds your reputation. And make sure you publish articles, because that's what's really going to make your reputation, right? So you want to make sure the reports and products that result from those grants are out in the world, because that's what is going to build your reputation. So a case of one, but in my case, that's what I went through.
Great, thank you, Prof. Joe. We have one final question, and that comes from Mofo Pen. And she asked, are there gatekeepers in funding organizations? Can grant applications be rejected due to gatekeeping? Do you have any experience of that?
I don't. The only time something like that happened to me was actually based upon, I had gotten a number of we had a very successful run with that iQuest project, and I was told we received 10 years worth of funding for that area. Don't submit anymore. But that's the only time it ever happened to me. So I'm not aware of it. In the US, there is triaging that occurs, but it doesn't happen at the program officer level. Usually the triage happens as a result of panels. So they might have three people review your proposal. And instead of having it discussed, the three people basically judged that it wasn't have merit to go forward on a panel for discussion. And so they just reject it, right? So there is some degree of triaging without discussion. But that's the only thing I've ever experienced. But that practice of triaging, you having several people review your proposal, 2 or 3 people, and then based upon their findings, not go forward. That's fairly common actually nowadays. But nothing where a program officer makes an independent judgment that this should not be funded, except if you apply someplace and you're not really meeting the call, right? Program officers don't want to waste reviewers' times because reviewer times are very precious. And they know that. So they want good reviewers. But that's I haven't, I have never experienced that. So, that's how I can answer that one.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Ju. I think we're coming to the end of it now. One remark was, I think someone was struggling with the URL link. So if you don't mind, perhaps copying and pasting it on the chat, or someone could assist you with regard to that. But I just want to extend our great appreciation on behalf of all who have attended. I think you have shared with us excellent advice and strategies and how to write effective grant applications. Your presentation was certainly very comprehensive, and you touched on many critical aspects in grant writing. I thought you also summarized very nicely on the one slide some of the key takeaways, and I just want to highlight that for everyone, perhaps those who join in late. So the one is a good grant proposal certainly must convince reviewers. You mentioned about it being argumentative, and I think that's something that perhaps we need to incorporate more in our applications coming through from South Africa, because the whole idea is about convincing and persuading people to award you the fund. The proposal should also be, all the components should certainly be very coherently linked, the problem, the goals, methods, and outcomes. And of course, the reviewers really want to read the proposal that makes sense. So it needs to be clear, it needs to be understandable. Make sure also that you study the call very clearly, because you want to match up your project with what is stated within the call, and you certainly address the priorities of the funding organization. You also mentioned about going through the application a number of times. There's various iterations and versions on it. So you need this in order to improve the quality. So it's about getting feedback, rewriting, careful planning. And so this also tells us that one has to start quite early in writing the application. So we have to be alert to these calls and start planning as soon as the call is announced. And something that we can also pick up on is the logic model. And I think that could be a very useful tool. So with that, Prof. Joe, thank you very much. I think you've given us all hope and inspiration in writing that grant proposal. As you indicated, rejection is sometimes a bitter pill to swallow, but we have to persevere. And I think with the advice that you've shared with us today, I think we certainly feel that we are empowered to start writing these proposals. Thank you very much, Prof. Joe.
Apparently I didn't share the PowerPoint with everybody. So I'm going to go in and do that now. So give me just a couple of minutes and you'll be able to download the PowerPoint. I really apologize that I don't know why I constantly forget to do that every time I love to use these tiny URLs to give everybody permission. And for whatever reason, I constantly forget to give universal acceptance to it. So I'm going to go do that right now. So just hold on just a second and you'll be able to download the PowerPoint.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm just going to figure out how to do it. Share. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. This link should now have permission. Someone in the audience can try it, and it should work. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Krachek. It seems like it is working. And also thank you very much to members of the audience. Take care. Bye-bye.